Welcome everyone to our webinar. I'd like to invite Joe Devon, the co-founder of Diamond, to join me as we get this exciting webinar started today. This is Diamond webinar series, and today is very special as we're releasing our third annual State of Accessibility report. So Joe, I'm going to hand this over to you to get started, and congratulations on today's release.
Thank you, Natasha. Before we begin, I would like to point out that down below, you can see there is a captions button, a CC live transcript button. So if you would like to use captions, you can click on that. There is also a Q&A right next to it. And during the entire webinar, please do ask questions if you have any, and we'll get to as many of them as we can toward the end. It is my absolute pleasure. It feels like having a baby. We have our third annual State of Accessibility report being released today. Now, 3 years ago, the impetus for this is we had a simple question. We're seeing that accessibility is having a moment in terms of the awareness, but does the awareness actually translate into action and improved accessibility? So when we started, we first needed a baseline, so we started to do some screen reader testing of the Alexa Top 100, but now we have 3 years of data and we've gotten some trend lines as well as answers, which we will be pleased to share with you today. And we're really excited for this report because we have also added, for the very first time, testing of mobile apps. So with that, I'm going to invite two members of our team over at Diamond, Dusty Levenberg, who is the Associate Director of Accessibility Operations for us. Please turn on your camera, Dusty. And Dennis Lembry, who is our Director of Accessibility. Thank you both. I will hand it off to you to present the results.
Thank you, Joe. And thanks everyone for joining today. We're excited to be here. If we're able to load up the slide deck that we'll present, and we can get started. All right, thank you, Natasha. So as Joe mentioned, we did website testing on the Alexa Top 100 sites in 2021. Excited to share the results with you right now. We can go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see the screen reader usability testing that the Diamond Accessibility SMEs performed in 2021. These are great results looking at the 62% accessible, 9% accessible with difficulty, and 29% inaccessible. So that rounds up to about 71% mostly accessible for these sites. We can move to the next slide, please. As Joe mentioned again, we now have 3 years worth of data to compare side by side. And looking at the screen reader usability testing of Alexa Top 100 websites, we can see tremendous progress in 2021, 62%. Compared to the 40% in 2022 and 29% in 2019. So we're excited with all of the progress and changes towards more accessible websites. We can go over to the next slide, please. All right, so here we're looking at the automated testing of Alexa Top 100 websites in which we checked with various checkpoints to determine whether a site was accessible or not. In great news, we had a 100% pass rate of websites that document language attribute tests. And this is just great news to hear. Whoops, we're a little fast there. Some other categories we tested in were input field labels, alternative text for images, button and links, have text labels, proper use of ARIA, and sufficient color contrast. With that, I'll hand it over to Dennis to go through a technical deep dive of these categories.
Thanks, Dusty. Yeah, so it was a little surprising, but really pleasant to find out that the 100 sites we tested all had the correct document language declared in the HTML element. So that was great. But as you can see, maybe not too surprising for some of you that proper use of ARIA was an error on 97% of the sites that we tested. So you may ask, why is that? Well, I think just plainly speaking, most developers don't fully understand ARIA, accessible rich internet applications. It's a big set of attributes that are applied in HTML to make things more semantic and accessible, but it can be pretty complex. A related issue is like many developers don't really implement semantic HTML very well. And that is kind of a known problem over the last several years. But that relates to ARIA because understanding semantic HTML will really help a developer understand how to better use ARIA. And let's all understand that ARIA is pretty popular solution to make things more accessible, but it doesn't fix everything. It's not the resolution to all accessibility problems. Certainly not. Things like complex design and different levels of support can definitely factor into the equation.
Hey, Dennis, can I just ask you to explain as well? This chart also shows 11.6 on the bottom. So you have the number 97 and then 11.6. Can you explain what the 11.6 relates to so people get a scope? Because one thing is there's an ARIA error on the page, but then what does that stand for?
Yeah, so on the visual we're looking at, the top percentage number is the percentage of pages that contained at least one error in that category. So 97% of the pages contained ARIA errors. The number at the bottom is the average number of failures per page. So the 11.6 is for each of those pages, they averaged 11.6 ARIA errors. So that's fairly high. I've seen higher numbers though. If you look at other reports, such as the WebAIM Million, I believe it is higher. So the properly labeled input fields, that wasn't too bad, only 11%. And on average, it was only 0.2 failures per page. So props to the Alexa top 100 sites on that. Some other design related issues would be sufficient color contrast. Not a surprise there, 67% of pages failed with an average of 22.7 errors per page. And then alt text for images and buttons and links with text labels or accessible names. And these are not too surprising, but not very good results. I think this is one of many good reasons why we want to continue stressing to include accessibility from the beginning of the software development lifecycle. To shift left is a popular term to describe that, where you're including and thinking about accessibility from the beginning, from the content, if not the design phase, and not waiting too late, into the development and QA phase. By that time, it's already too late for a lot of these issues.
Can you also read out those two, the alt text and the buttons, so people that are only listening can hear those results as well?
Sure. The alt text, it was 24% of pages had an error with an average of 2.7 errors per page. And text labels for buttons and links, that's 43% of the pages at an average of 6 errors per page. So not too good, as that's a pretty important thing. I would attribute a lot of that to icons, like linked icons serving as links and buttons, and the alt text or an ARIA label or whatnot was not provided for those. I often see that. Back to you, Dustin.
Thanks, Dennis, and very informative in looking at the different categories of pass fail for these. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the much-awaited Diamond mobile app testing data will be presented next. We're very, very excited to share this with you, as it is Diamond's first time testing on mobile. So to do this, the Diamond accessibility team took a look at the top 20 free apps on both the iOS Apple Store and the Google Play Store. And Looking at the chart here, we can see that 65% of iOS apps were accessible, 75% of Android apps were fully accessible. And next up, we had 10% accessible with difficulty on the iOS side, 5% accessible with difficulty on the Android side, and ultimately 25% inaccessible on iOS and 20% inaccessible on Android. Dennis, did you want to chime in here with any other notes?
It's just if you want to discuss iOS versus Android, I mean, I think Android came out a little bit ahead in the testing, but it's not enough really to say that it's better. It was pretty close. What I think maybe was more important is like when we tested the paid mobile apps, when we had screen reader. Oh, previous slide. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. But yeah, the paid mobile apps scored a lot with a lot more poorly, actually. The free apps did a lot better, and I think the consensus is the free apps were done by larger companies that one, have more resources, and two, maybe more susceptible to lawsuits. So for those reasons, maybe doing more for accessibility.
Dennis, and maybe you can walk us through how we tested with screen readers for the free mobile apps. What did the team look at?
Oh, yeah. So the details are in the report, but the website screen reader testing and the application testing, the main test was screen reader usability testing, and that was to register, log in, and log out of the app. And that was the main thing. We did do, as we're going to mention in a minute, we did do some four manual tests on mobile apps, and also we did screen reader usability testing on one of the main features of the mobile apps.
Thank you. Yeah, so we were using the screen reader testing, usability testing for the registration process for the free apps. That was where we saw a lot of successes and failures. So we can move to the next slide, please. So as Dennis mentioned, a little teaser earlier, for the manual testing of the paid mobile apps, we had 4 different checkpoints that we looked at when we were doing manual testing. And we can see on this graph here that iOS had a 35% pass and a 65% fail on the top 20 paid apps. On the Android side, we had 29% pass and a 71% fail of manual testing on paid mobile apps.
Yes, so these were the manual tests. So we chose 4 tests, pretty much out of WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they were orientation. So to check if the app can be rotated, not only viewed portrait or vertically, but if the device was held horizontally, landscape mode as well, both modes, that's the requirement. So that was one check. Another one was alternative text for informative images. And the third was headings. And the fourth was text resize. So to ensure that if the user has increased the text size on the mobile device, that the application respected that setting.
Great, and I think if you read the report and a little bit more in our conversation, we'll chat about these requirements in WCAG 2.1 for mobile and how that affects free and paid apps. We can move on to the next slide. And finally, we did screen reader reusability testing of the main feature of mobile apps. And here we looked at both free and paid on the iOS Apple Store and the Google Play Store. So on the iOS side, under paid category of main feature, we had a 10% pass. Under the free apps, we had an 80% pass. Looking over at Android, we had a 40% pass on the paid apps and a 65% on the free apps. So Dennis, maybe let's chat through again the difference between paid and free here and how that affects our results.
Yeah, we were a little surprised about the discrepancy here, but if you think about it, it kind of made sense. You know, a lot of the large companies, large corporations with lots of resources and susceptible to lawsuits, really paid more attention to accessibility, and that really did show in the results. A lot of the free apps were just kind of like very small companies and just kind of trendy things. So, you know, accessibility wasn't thought of very carefully.
Right, and very different size of user base as well. So the free apps will have a lot more users, whereas the paid apps will often be a smaller user group, which I'm sure influences some of these decisions. Those were all the stats we wanted to cover today. And back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Dusty and Dennis. I will also add, we'll go into this a little bit later based on one of the questions that are coming up, but I will add that one of the reasons that we decided to go with screen reader testing of registration and login, log out is that we've gotten some feedback that this was a common problem where a company might say that they've done some accessibility work and then they locked users out of even registering or logging in, and so the entire rest of the application is useless if you're unable to go into that. So now I would like to introduce Meryl K. Evans, a superstar in the accessibility world, who is our marketing and captions specialist. Take it away, Meryl.
Thank you, Joe. Howdy, y'all. I'm Meryl, and my pronouns are she, her, deaf. I am a member of Generation X with shorter than curly hair, pale skin, glasses, and a black top. The pandemic has been a boom and a bust for people with disabilities. For me, it has changed my personal life and career for the better. I've been a remote worker since 2005. In 15 years, I may have done 5 video calls total. Now I easily do 5 video calls a week. What changed? The first being my colleagues all switched from offices to remote working. As a result, they started holding regular video meetings. One team wanted to include me and found a clever workaround in using Google Slide caption in our call. It worked. That drove me to look for more solutions, which led to a blog post about automatic captioning video calls in April 2020. At this point, all the big video platforms didn't have automatic caption except for Skype, but they weren't very good. The free version of Google Meet added automatic caption by May 2020. At that time, Zoom was better testing automatic caption, but they were only available on paid accounts. Thanks to a petition, they agreed to make it available on all free accounts, but it took about 8 months before that happened. Then in June, Microsoft Teams iOS app allowed users to use the app with the caption free. All of these happened because of the pandemic, when employees were being locked out of conversation. It wasn't just the deaf and the hard of hearing. People struggled with sound, had to have the sound off due to other family members working or schooling from home. Without question, COVID propelled video platform companies to add captions. Now let's hope organizations start captioning the videos, as that has not changed much. With clients switching to remote work, they also added communication, collaboration, and productivity apps. That's why it didn't surprise me that the Alexa Top 100 changed and that mobile apps show many of these apps as well as delivery-related tools. My coworkers and I have been using more of these apps and tools. And on a personal note, my youngest attended his last year of high school on the second floor of our home office school building. Walking past my office every day, he noticed I did a lot of caption video calls. Last July, he went off to university. One day, I got the most amazing text message from him. He asked if I would like to do a video call. Since then, we've had a few of these caption conversations. That would have never happened without the pandemic. Not all of deaf and hard of hearing people have thrived with caption video call. One person who has been hard of hearing since birth does not read that. He says video calls magnify the sound too much. So it's important to mute when you're not talking. I've read stories from people with disabilities, mobile disabilities, who say the pandemic made it possible for them to work and get more done as companies digitized more of their business and added delivery options. Several blind people said they experience less anxiety because they don't have to worry about transportation and getting around. People with anxiety-related disabilities feel less stress working from home. We all hope the world does not go back to the old way of doing things, as it may lock out people with disabilities who found more independent and work opportunities. And know that not all disabilities are a spectrum. And know that all disabilities are a spectrum. When you meet one deaf person, then you've met one deaf person. We do not all fall into neat little buckets. As you involve and interview users, ensure you talk to more than one from the same disability group. A lot of us have opposite needs and preferences. Better yet, build a brain trust by hiring people with disabilities. So some of the best, most loyal workers you'll ever have. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Meryl. Please stay up. I'm going to shortly bring back Dusty and Dennis, but first, I wanted to mention what you described, that the video platform companies started to look at captioning like a month or so after the pandemic. I think that's quite startling, and it clearly had a big impact on you and lots of other people. Any thoughts about that and how the pandemic has really affected the entire accessibility community?
It's been a lot of people with disabilities are grateful because it's given them more freedom, more ability to do things for themselves. But there are still some barriers. For example, when I was doing my first ever COVID testing, this was like 18 to 20 months after the pandemic. Three of us with three different disabilities all ran into a barrier with that one process. And a friend who was blind said he could not even make the appointment online without help. So clearly some companies haven't progressed as much as we like. So, but a lot of us are very happy with the progress made because it's letting us participate more.
Good points. Thank you, Meryl. Now I would like to invite back Dusty and Dennis to join us for a panel conversation. And as we begin, we only have one question right now in the Q&A, so I would invite folks to add more questions because we'd love to see the perspective of other people beyond. We've been discussing this internally for a while, and sometimes you're missing the forest for the trees. So we would really love to make this a little bit more engaging with the whole community. So that said, let's start with a conversation about ARIA. So I don't think anybody in the accessibility space was surprised by the ARIA results. But why does it seem that ARIA never gets better, and what can we do to change that?
I guess I'll take a stab at that, Joe. Well, first off, as I previously mentioned, many developers just don't fully understand ARIA and semantic HTML. Some ARIA is pretty straightforward, but it can be pretty complex. So I understand that. Especially if designs are complex. Oftentimes I see interfaces that are over designed or call for customization that is not necessary. And if you have complex interactions and a lot of customization, that's going to require a lot of ARIA. So that's going to cause a lot of problems. But I think one big way to address it is foundationally is just education. I think educational institutions, colleges and universities particularly should be teaching semantic HTML a lot more, and including accessibility in development classes, including ARIA. But on top of that, there are some programs going on that help with awareness and education. For a while, there's the AIR Web Accessibility Contest yearly by Nobility that is a great event. Another thing to look into is Teach Access. That's an organization to basically teach accessibility. And there's a new one called A11Y Next Gen Mentorship, a mentorship program that I am participating in to help teach digital accessibility to folks around the world who are interested.
So Dennis, I'm wondering, for those that use ARIA incorrectly, perhaps it's a first start for many organizations and companies who are getting into accessibility, and they see ARIA as a way in, but they might, obviously, based on our testing, they're using it incorrectly. So what are some ways, besides these trainings, to help developers have a better semantic HTML understanding instead of using ARIA almost as a Band-Aid?
Great question. The semantic HTML really is the first thing to know, and that, again, that comes down to like basic education. But there are some online resources that are good for that. One that comes to mind is just MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network. But learning ARIA, I mean, like I said, some is straightforward, but some is not. So it takes time, just like anything else, to learn it and become comfortable with testing it and specializing it. It takes time.
And Charles Hall adds, some of the burden lies on design teams in order to document the intent and methods to support the intent prior to development.
That's a great point.
Right?
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, mark up your wireframes appropriately so developers know, what the accessible name is supposed to be for this, or what the focus order is for that, and so on and so forth.
Shout out to great annotations in wires are so important on wireframes. Before we leave the ARIA conversation, something we were talking about internally a bit too was, I'm wondering if a lot of the cause of the problem is also that there are some frameworks like jQuery and others that are imported into a web page just to provide the functionality, even if it's not used sometimes. And I'm wondering if the ARIA is sometimes bad on one of these frameworks, and this causes the entire site to fail the automated testing. Do you feel that, A, do you feel that's true? B, in the cases where it's not really being used, is it possible that actually it's a more usable page than it shows by that ARIA error? And then lastly, what if we create if somebody creates some kind of project where we analyze, and maybe we can do this with the help of Jared at WebAIM, where we analyze how many of the frameworks do have bad ARIA, what percentage of the sites are really importing that, and maybe we can fork off these large projects and create an accessible or something that doesn't have ARIA errors. So I know, sorry, that went into a little bit too much technical detail, but hopefully you can unpack that.
That last point would definitely be a worthwhile effort. I think your first question about the libraries and frameworks, and my answer is yes. They're getting better, but I think there are ARIA errors to be corrected throughout many of the frameworks and libraries, yeah, so correcting those would be a good idea, but on a whole, like just more fundamentally, I think the education really, in my view, would be top priority.
Thanks. Anybody want to add to that? No. Okay. So now I'm going to go to a question by Gary Morin. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Is screen reader testing the only assistive technology you address? And then what about speech recognition for persons with dexterity impairments? The latter population may actually be larger than those who use screen readers. And that's a great question. We have to start with something, but we are constantly evaluating the testing that we're doing. We did not only do screen reader testing, but Dennis, do you want to speak to what other kind of testing that we've done and what your thoughts are on the speech recognition? Is that something that's easily testable, or how would you approach that?
Well, to answer your question directly, yes, we only tested with screen readers. We did test with the big three, though. We tested with JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver. But no, that's a great point. I think in the future we're going to strongly consider testing with other assistive technologies. But screen readers are kind of the most popular, and they're the most difficult to design and develop for. So a lot of the solutions for screen readers, not all of them, but a lot of the solutions for the other types of assistive technologies will be taken care of when you fix it for a screen reader. Great question.
But we also did automated testing with the Axe plugin, as well as the checkpoints, right? So I don't want people to think there was only screen readers. So can you clarify that?
Yeah. So for assistive technology itself was only screen readers. Usability testing was screen readers. But yeah, the testing also included, and we kind of separated it out, the automated testing using Axe, and then on mobile we did 4 manual checks.
Thanks. Now, it's also interesting that we had some issues with alt text and color contrast, and those are not necessarily something that is solely an issue of the design and development team and the product team, because let's take a couple of examples. If you are doing an enterprise application and you have a content team that uploads their own images, and they may not have good color contrast, they may be missing alt text, so that's a case where you need to have other parts of the organization handle accessibility, which is a harder ask. And then you might have a social media company, for example, where you have user-generated content and they could upload images without alt text. First of all, how much can be done by the product development team to try and ensure that users or content generators are forced to put in alt text, for example, or what other tools can be added to it? How much do we blame the product development team, and how much of it is really realistic? Anybody have thoughts there?
Well, I know Meryl does.
Neil speaking. This is why I say accessibility isn't just the development team's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility, especially for my fellow marketers, because we put out a lot of public-facing content, but it's also an API, or application programming interface issue. Many people use social media tools to schedule their posts, and not all of them give you the ability to add alternative text most likely because the social network API is closed. But even if it was open, many content creators and posters are not in development and don't know about alternative text or color contrast. Color contrast requires more education. That's why the Diamond team and I have been training everyone, including non-tech pros like marketers and content creators, to educate them. But we can only reach so many people. It takes the village. That is why companies need to hold accessibility training for the entire organization. The dev team can create a beautiful website that is completely accessible. All it takes is for one blog post without alt text, a video without caption, an image with poor contrast to mess it up. Organization-wide education will help. K-12 schools and universities can also make it part of the process. Students always learn that editing is part of the writing process. We also need to teach students that adding caption, alternative text, checking color contrast, and all the other stuff needs to be part of the workflow.
Thanks, Meryl. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I just want to tack on about A tag, the lesser known W3C WAI guideline. So that's been around since 2015 as an official guideline. So A tag is the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. So content management systems, even social media apps, I believe, should be held to adhering to those guidelines, which includes things like making the interface accessible and helping people make the content accessible, such as captions and alternative text.
Yeah, and to add on there with Meryl's comment on it taking a village is that it's all of our responsibility, right? So it's easy to pass blame to content managers, to designers, to developers, but it's really everyone's in this together to make the world more accessible. So it's about training, it's about awareness, and it's bringing all these different viewpoints together to be able to solve for everyone. And I think the pandemic has been a great catapult for this, and we have so much more to learn as a full team.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to add a comment from Gary Morin. Please address audio descriptions of videos. Captioning is only half of the video equation. Anyone have some thoughts on audio description?
Well, this is Meryl speaking. Audio description is definitely not as ubiquitous as caption, and we are working on that. I have seen some conversation, and it's growing slowly but surely. And you're right, Gary. It's audio description is very important, and it's going to take education, not everything else.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw a video of something like an 82-point rally on what is it called again? It's not like tennis, but it's like those little funny nets. I forget the name of that sport, but they had an 82. It was like an Olympic thing. They had 82 shot rally, and it all happened so fast. It was doubles, so there were 4 players on there, and I posted internally in our Slack, how do you audio describe this? And it's just a fascinating field because I don't know how somebody would do that, but it's something that we have to solve somehow. And I think that really you have to speak to people with disabilities in order to understand, what the desire would be. Now I'm going to go back again to Gary Morin and our previous conversation. A little bit of criticism, which is good. I think we need to have lots of people sharing because we're not going to learn without that. So Gary says, quote, starting with something, end quote, always dismisses those of us who use speech recognition based on a false paradigm that screen readers are the only AT used. It's destructive and exclusionary. They're not the most popular, just believed to be. And then I'd like to see fact-based evidence that screen readers are the most common AT to justify the exclusion of other AT. So from my perspective, I'll just add that it was a great question that you brought up, and we're absolutely going to look at it internally. I don't think that we're necessarily saying that there's more users, more assistive technology users of one kind versus the other. It's more that that we're speaking to people, and this was something that came up, and it's only by communicating with folks and asking for feedback that we're going to learn and get better. So apologies if we didn't make it perfect, but we keep trying to get better, and I think that's about all that we can do. Anybody want to add to that? No. Oh, badminton. The sport I was talking about was badminton. Thank you for those in the chat that replied there. All right, we have a lot of questions now, which is awesome. I would like to touch on one more internal question that we came up with before reaching the audience. There were new regulations around mobile requirements in the WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, which came out in June of 2018, or sorry, were ratified, or whatever the term is, by the W3C in June. So as a developer myself, or I used to be a developer, and I've run into legacy code bases, one of the aspects that are in that requirement is that on mobile, when you're switching, sorry, you can't really see on the screen, but when you're switching orientation, you have to be able to look at the screen in different orientations, look at all of the features. And I'm just thinking, wow, if you have an older app that might have 1 million lines of code, how difficult would it be to refactor that? So I'm wondering, do you think that that's one of the reasons that the results were not so good in terms of some of those mobile features like orientation changes?
Hi, this is Dusty speaking. Yes, for sure. So, and Dennis, please correct me if I get my dates mixed up, but WCAG 2.0 came out in 2008. It was published in 2008. So for any apps or websites that are using legacy frameworks, dated systems, they may have tried to be compliant to WCAG 2.0, but not have enough resources or time commitment to make adjustments for 2.1 mobile considerations. And while you can say it's been out since 2018, as we all know, in the tech industry, roadmaps take a while, and planning in advance for these things, it's a lot of resources. So for larger corporations, they may have had the bandwidth to pivot and take new WCAG guidelines into consideration. But for smaller organizations or development teams, they might have to do a complete refactor. So as always, it's about staying up to date with the standard, keeping that in your pipeline as a constant. I know that there will be changes, know that accessibility is a journey, and always think about accessibility as far left as possible, right up there with data and security regulations. This should be part of our conversation.
Thanks, Dusty. Dennis, agree or disagree? Dusty made a good argument there. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, some of these applications are very large and move slow, but I mean, on the other hand, I can't really say that's an excuse. The WCAG 2.1 kind of been out 3.5 years almost with the orientation requirement. And these apps, especially the mobile apps, I think move pretty quickly. Technology moves fast. I'm constantly updating my apps on my personal device. So I would hope by now that companies are shifting left and including the orientation requirement into the designs. So I guess we'll find out more in the future years.
Yeah, I'm so curious what the next couple of years are going to look like. Quickly, just add that Gary Morin replied, it's not just us, it's a Section 508 community issue as well regarding assistive technology. Now I'm going to go to a comment from Anonymous. Suggest running test automation on iOS and Android apps for next year and beyond, unless you did to complement the screen reader testing. Thoughts?
We looked into that. Yeah, we looked into that briefly over the past year, but yeah, we punted it because it's not as straightforward as it sounds. It's not nearly as automated testing on the web. So we'll definitely look into it further. next year.
Thank
Exactly.
you.
And in the spirit of perpetual improvement, as this was Diamond's first year with mobile testing, we know there's a lot of room to grow. So we appreciate all the feedback that we can take into consideration for the next time.
Yes, please give us feedback. We had several rounds of testing. Lots of things came up. We had to challenge our assumptions and learn. So it was quite a fun challenge. But yeah, we'll always can learn more. So please keep that feedback coming. Cam Baudouin, I hope I pronounced that right. I'm curious as to why testing is still being done with Internet Explorer 11. Any path to switching to Edge?
I guess the first answer to that is just consistency, to be consistent with the previous years for comparing data. And the second answer would be, we considered it, and we'll consider it again next year. We just wanted to ensure that, JAWS, because we used IE11 for JAWS testing. So we wanted to, make sure that it was fair to, that there's enough support with Edge to test on JAWS.
That makes sense. B. Podé, the growth of usage of closed captioning in the workplace has been wonderful, but for those of us working in a global environment, I find the accuracy of captions can dip significantly when people have strong accents if English is not their first language. Are there explorations being done that you are aware of to improve? I will send that to Meryl, who is sometimes the automated captions calls marijuana. What was the other one we had the other day that was pretty funny? You've seen lots of different terms. So what do you think?
Thank you, Joe. This is Meryl speaking. Well, as you all know, English is my first language, and none of the automatic captioning apps like my accent one bit. And so I feel you with the question. And yes, there is work in progress. In fact, one company, Google, has Project Relate, and I was involved with that as a tester. And what they're doing is amazing. It's working with people who talk slower or differently than I do. It's for people with all different speech disabilities, like Tourette's, and people who don't talk much. So what they're doing is taking the data. The more you record a whole bunch of phrases, expressions, nonsense stuff, and it gets better and better. And it's my hope that kind of thing will keep spreading and maybe port. I would love to be able to take that, the text from that and copy it into captioning. Like if I'm making a video, I can have it read my caption because it'll be more accurate than the standard artificial intelligence. So yes, there is work on it. It's slowly but surely coming along.
Thanks, Meryl. Anybody want to add? No? Okay. Now we have a question from the great Larry Goldberg. The report footnotes a link to the Alexa Top 100, which is sorted by country, but the report says you look at English language sites. Which is the right way to determine which sites were studied? Great question, Larry. Before I pass it on to the team if they want to add to it, we really were trying not to focus on individual websites because we're trying to get a sense of the overall trends without people coming in and necessarily like going, shaming this company or that company. It probably would have been an easier media narrative, but we're really more trying to focus on the positive of the growth of accessibility and also understanding the trends. Now, if there's some other researchers out there, we might think about sharing some raw data, but we're trying to really not think about the raw data for everybody to look at. So those are my thoughts on it, but if Dusty, Dennis, Meryl, you want to add to it, go for it.
Just a couple side notes in addition to that is there were a lot of complexities that came with trying to test a website, say like in Chinese, and it just wasn't feasible. It had to do with like the language not being set on the web page, to just complexities in translating just to be able to do the test. So some of them weren't just feasible to do.
Thanks, Dennis. Juliana Contreras just wants to say, very insightful webinar. Big fan of yours, Mero. Great job. So just wanted to share that. We have a question from John J. Frank. There's a lot of text in here, so I'm just going to get to the question here, which is there are over 350,000 churches in America. Many or most misuse information and communication technology. What about them? In America, 40% of adults say they attend church weekly. This leaves out the millions, almost 1/3 of adults who see, hear, or read somewhat, but not well. Where do students and pastors learn why and how to use ICT? Using ICT accessibility is the other side of building apps, websites, programs, and products accessibly. Thoughts?
Is the question how to create accessible content, or how to use like assistive technology?
Well, I would say relevant to this, I'll kick off with the first answer. I don't know that we're able to test that because this is mostly about the report, but I think the question is, where do students and pastors learn why and how to use ICT and how to do outreach toward them? And I think Teach Access was a good example of that's a little bit more universities.
Yeah, and some of the blind and low vision like advocates and agencies around the country could help with those types of impairments. Other organizations like Easter Seals Crossroads, you know, a lot of states have funding to create like a regional or a statewide office to help people learn and use and provide assistive technology.
Yes, and other ways to be collaborative would be if there's a specific institution or group that wants to try something out and share your feedback to the rest of the community so we can learn from each other's efforts and always improve. I think that's a great way for ICT is to build out that ecosystem of community so we can support each other.
Thank you. And now as we wrap up, first I'm going to ask you, should we be happy or sad about the state of accessibility? Are we getting better? Like what are the trend lines that you see? Is this gonna reach the wider audience?
This is Mero speaking. I believe we should be happy about the state of accessibility because we are seeing progress. And since this is the first time we've analyzed mobile apps, it exceeded many of our expectations. When it comes to accessibility, I preach progress, not perfection. Accessibility supporters are passionate. Sometimes a little too much because they call out a company for the accessibility mistake. For example, a company added live captioning for all of its live videos. Several accessibility supporters commented that human captions are better than artificial intelligence, which is what the company used. And I agree with that, of course. As one of the biggest consumers of captions, I praise the company for progress and to keep iterating. Don't criticize the company for having alt text that's not good enough. There are too many who don't add alt text at all. Don't criticize the company for opting for automatic captions for live video and then human captions for recorded video. There are too many who don't caption at all. Praise them for getting started, encourage them to iterate and take the accessibility from good to great with suggestion. I see plenty of caption videos that could be better, but I never provide feedback, and that's act. Providing criticism and negative feedback could have the opposite effect. It could make the company give up thinking there's no point. I know I work harder when someone says I'm doing a good job or give me advice on how to take it to the next level. It takes practice for something to become a habit, to become muscle memory. In the early days of adding alt text, I'd forget every other photo. Now I really do. In training for a marathon, you don't run 10 miles on the first step. So yeah, I'm happy with the progress and accessibility.
Thank you, Mero. Dennis, Dusty, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean the test results that, are up and down. But we saw the trend in the screen reader usability testing as improving. So I guess that's the big takeaway. And we'll see over the next years, what progresses. But awareness continues to grow, and that's one of the challenges. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Thank you.
Yes, and to add on to that, again, accessibility is a journey, and it's very hard to stay at 100% accessible, right? Because we're always implementing new features, fixing, changing. So it's a journey, and in the spirit of perpetual improvement, it starts with awareness, continues with training, continues with sharing lessons, and including a diverse community to provide their input, provide feedback, and help build a more accessible future in the digital landscape and everywhere.
Thank you, Dusty. And I'll add my final thoughts, which are I want to share because this comes up often. Why did we pick the top 100 and then on the mobile side, the top 20 apps from each platform? And the real reason is if we try to go too far and too wide with our testing, we're going to see worse results. There's no question about it. In order to really catch a trend of accessibility to see if it's improving, we really need to go with the top tech companies that, or the top websites as well as the apps, because they really set the tone, and really to a large extent the product development life cycle really looks to these large companies that put in these big investments in order to see where they're going to go. And we're going to only see that trend up on the top. And hopefully we're going to start to see that this trickles down to other organizations. I think the next level is really going to be looking at the Fortune 500 companies. And we really hope to see that they start to pick up on what the top tech companies have done. But I'm not saying that the results are wonderful. We'd love to see 90+% and approaching 100% of the very top sites, but at least we're seeing that it's a positive trend line, because knowing that, we'll see that the rest of the tech industry is going to follow along. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Natasha, and please do read the report. Please give us feedback, and we really look forward to keeping improving our annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone for joining. As a reminder, you'll all be receiving the report right after you log off this webinar. So thank you to all our panelists who looks like they dropped off. But again, congratulations, Joe, on today's release, and we look forward to seeing you at our webinar next year.